favorite subjects, which is starting a food business. And let me just agree to be recorded and we'll move on. As Kathy talked about a little bit, this program is really something that comes out of a number of conversations that she and I have had, or other SCORE mentors and I have had, in relation to food businesses. And I'm glad to be able to share some of what I know from what I've done with food businesses and around food businesses for the last better than 30 years. A little bit about me before we get started. As you heard, my name's Winifred McGee. I'm currently a part-time consultant for the University of Scranton Small Business Development Center. Through the miracle of the internet, I actually live between Elizabethtown and Hershey. And so I'm talking to many people who can visualize exactly where I live, or almost exactly where I live. But I came to work for them because they had a long history of working in farm and food businesses. And it was something I could share with them. And the fact that I could start working more than I was doing in my previous job with Extension, at this point, with working one-to-one with people who wanted to set up a food business. As I said, almost 3 years I've been with the SBDC, since the beginning of 2019. So long before everybody else went virtual, I was going virtual with my consulting with the clients. And before that, I had more than 30 years with Penn State Extension. All of that time, although I've done a number of different things and treated a number of different subjects, my focus has been primarily on farm and food businesses. I most like working with people and building their business plan, because I think a business plan is very, very important for any business, not so much to get funding, although everybody thinks about it that way, but because it is a way to center your thoughts on exactly what you're doing and start taking your thoughts from what you want to do and what you want to make and what you want to sell, to who's going to buy it and why they're going to buy it, and how you're going to continue to provide value to those customers, because I think that makes a sustainable business. I also love to be a grant proposal coach, helping people put together grant proposals for specific things that they want to do in relation to enhancing their food business. You can never start a business with a grant, but a grant sometimes will help you build. The "and more" that I have on this slide is because I've spent a lot of time looking at, studying, considering shared kitchen incubators, which are one of the ways that people who are in food production can get access to a full commercially set up kitchen without necessarily going into the large investment that they might have to do initially. So much like the baby in the incubator, those small companies can be in the incubator, but incubators and food incubators in particular, shared kitchens, are very easy to start, but very hard to keep in business. And so I've done a lot with that too. But enough about me. Let's think about food business, which we're here to discuss. First of all, there's no such thing as a simple food business. Back in the 1990s, when I originally started working for Penn State Extension, there were certain patterns that you would follow. If you wanted to get into a food business, you would do A, B, and C, and you'd get there. And as long as you had a good quality product and you got a number of people who would talk to other people and bring things in and bring other customers in, you could move forward. I'm not saying that businesses aren't difficult to start and that they weren't then, but it was simpler than it is now, because as I have here, making food used to be so simple. But as the chain from the farm to the table has lengthened, as there are more hands through which the ingredients, the supplies go between the originator and the customer, there has had to be more scrutiny in relation to food safety. And that food safety scrutiny is what has caused food businesses to be a bit more complicated. So there are different standards. When I'm asked by Kathy or some of the other SCORE mentors with whom I've worked. What does this person need to start a business? Or I get a call from some entrepreneur who wants to know what they need to do to start the business. My answer usually is, it depends. And it depends on the things that you see on this screen. It depends on the type of food that's going to be made, the way it's going to be marketed and sold, where the kitchen that they're making that food is located, and how much business they're really going to do. How many dollars are going to be generated? Because the more dollars that are generated, the wider the distribution of the food, and then the more care that needs to be taken in relation to food safety. So all of those things come into play in order to set up a not so simple food business. The best way I can explain to you about the fact that not all paths are the same is to tell you a story. A couple of years ago, I was on an educational tour with a group of other people on a tour bus. And we were going to places in York County and places in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And everything worked fine with our tour bus driver using his GPS to go from one location to the next, until we wanted to stop at the Southeast Agricultural Research and Education and Extension Center near Landisville. And I always think about it as the Landisville Center, outside of Lancaster. The tour bus went along the route until we saw something very much like you see here on the screen. This lovely covered bridge. And we could almost see the educational center on the other side of that covered bridge, but we could not get to it because there was not enough clearance for the tour bus to go through. Was that a bad path to the place? Of course it wasn't the bad path. It was, first of all, okay for a car. It would have been okay for a small truck. It would have been okay for somebody on a bicycle or somebody on foot. But that tour bus had to turn around in the Spooky Nook parking lot, if folks are familiar with that area, and head back to the main route to 283 and go up to the next exit and get off and come around so that we could get to the place that we could almost see on the other side of that covered bridge. Starting a food business can be like that. Your vehicle might not be able to use the path that everybody else has told you was successful for them. And so we need to look at the different paths. And the paths we're going to talk about, and picking the path that best fits what you want to do, is the gist of what I'm going to be discussing over the next half hour. And by the way, if you have any questions, Kathy is going to be monitoring the chat, so go ahead and ask the questions as time comes up instead of trying to keep them in your head until the end. I think I can handle that. So anyway, you need to pick the path that best fits, whether you're looking at some kind of non-regulated food business, whether you want to do it in your own personal kitchen, whether you want to make the food and you think you're going to have to make the food in a commercial kitchen and you're going to do processing of some kind of packaged food, or whether you're going to do some type of retail sales. And I understand there are a number of restaurateurs that have joined us today, so perhaps I can shed a little more light on that kind of information as well. But be ready, like the tour bus driver, to pivot, because this is a constantly changing avenue. FDA continues to look at what needs to be done, and the Food and Drug Administration does work with Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture in our state to make sure that many businesses are regulated. So FDA is continually looking at new areas in order to have concerns about food safety. Their most recent one was 2 weeks ago when they met to talk about e-commerce and food. We've had a lot of people who have been buying food through Blue Apron or one of those other businesses that have packaged food for some time. But with the epidemic taking place and all the people being quarantined and then restaurants being closed, a lot of restaurants pivoted to a lot of takeout orders using third-party delivery as well as delivering things themselves. And that has hit the FDA radar screen. So there were 3 days, actually 3 afternoons of presentations and FDA gathering information. And I see on the horizon, the next pivot that's going to have to be made is in relation to retail sales, even though, as I'll talk to you today, so far, FDA does not work with retail sales. It's here on the state level that we're talking about inspection and licensure. So pick the best path, but be ready to pivot. And we've all learned how to pivot, whether we like it or not, throughout COVID. I'm going to start with the easiest one, probably. Exceptions to the rule. These are types of food businesses that need no inspection and need no license. Okay, I see, Colin. I just saw that you popped up and asked about cloud kitchens. I'll be talking about cloud kitchens in just a little while. So if you can bear with me, I'll be back to you about cloud kitchens. But anyway, the exceptions to the rule. Cooking schools and demonstrations, being a personal chef, and curiously enough, having a bed and breakfast where you serve breakfast only are all exceptions to the rule. Let me elaborate on each of those just a bit as we move ahead. First of all, cooking schools and demonstrations. A discussion and a chart that Kathy put together and shared with me sparked this particular presentation in relation to what do we do about cooking schools and demonstrations. So what I'm going to share with you over the next couple of seconds, I learned because of what Kathy and I talked about, as well as a discussion with a trusted PDA inspector who did a lot of research for us and came up with what I'm going to share. First of all, cooking schools and demonstrations, as I'd often heard in the past, are considered an educational endeavor. They are not considered necessarily to be a food service type business or a food production business, even though people might be making food in those classes. The participants get to see the kitchen and see the food prep and judge based on their knowledge of food sanitation whether they want to taste the samples or not. And usually it's just samples given out. Or if people are taking part in the class, like we see here in this picture, then they may take what they've made home, but they have helped make it and they understand what the food safety standards were during it. So they can judge the sanitation and standards. They can determine whether to eat or not. And because of that, cooking schools and demonstrations are not something that is regulated. Those endeavors aren't inspected and they are not licensed, like we'll talk about with many other types of businesses where food is made. In fact, that trusted PDA inspector that I talked about said that she had never inspected a cooking demonstration or school, and she didn't expect that she would. They are just treated primarily like, or you would just treat your own business as you set it up, primarily like it's any other type of service business, any other educational business that would deal with something other than food. The second type of business that doesn't need to be inspected or licensed is the personal chef. That's where somebody gathers up all of the ingredients and goes to the customer's kitchen. The sanitation is under control of the customer. The personal chef will often use the pots, pans, utensils, and various other things in that home kitchen. So there's no chance or very little chance of cross-contamination other than what the chef brings in the way of supplies and what is on the chef coat that we see here. The finished items are quickly cooled down and packaged so that they don't stay in that temperature danger zone. You see the thermometer above. They don't stay between 41 and 135 degrees for any longer than they have to They get into the refrigerator, they get into the freezer, they cool down. They're prepared for people to warm them up, and often instructions are given on how to warm them up. So personal chefs are just providing a service like anyone else would do for your home service. Any type of individual that come in and provide any kind of care for things that go on in the home, and therefore they are not inspected, they are not licensed. The third is my favorite, because I used to teach a class called Ins and Outs of Bed and Breakfast when I first got to Extension. That was INNS, by the way. And in Ins and Outs of Bed and Breakfast, we originally talked about the fact that if you had a bed and breakfast business, you were going to have to set up a kitchen that met commercial standards, or you weren't going to be able to what we called crack an egg. So you had to serve a continental breakfast rather than a full cooked breakfast if you didn't have a commercial kitchen that was inspected and if you weren't licensed to make those meals for the public. However, there was a hue and cry, and almost everything that we do food safety wise goes by the PA food code here in Pennsylvania. And they, the people who were involved in tourism and support, lobbied the legislature in order to make a change. So beds and breakfasts could at least cook a cooked breakfast, because they really were not competing with very many other businesses well. And so what happened is there was a regulation there was a piece of legislation that was put through. It was in the mid-1990s that said that beds and breakfast, homesteads or inns, were linked with railroad dining cars, which was a strange mixture for me. I went to Harrisburg the day they announced it, and it was a strange mixture for me. But what they said basically was the easiest way for them to do it is to say, you only serve breakfast because you're a bed and breakfast. You don't serve the wine and cheese in the afternoon or any little cocktails or anything else throughout the day. You don't serve lunches. You just serve the breakfast. You only serve it to the people who have stayed overnight, not other guests, not other paying guests or otherwise. It made sense in some standard, because first of all, we don't see the PDA inspectors hopping on the railroad cars as they pass through and going and inspecting the dining cars. Second of all, you and I don't hop on a railroad car without a ticket just to have breakfast on the dining car and hop off at another stop. And so it's only those people who are staying. So as long as you're only serving breakfast and you're only serving to people who are staying at your bed and breakfast overnight, those paying guests, you're allowed to have any kind of breakfast you want made in your residential style kitchen, and you're not registered, you're not licensed, you're not inspected. That's the third and final category of the people who are not regulated at all within the food code. Move to a little bit more complication. There are many people who are considering making some kind of food in their home. This is called a limited food establishment, and it is regulated, it is inspected, it is licensed by Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Food Safety. It requires certain types of food processing. Not all are allowed. And it is the food there is made with the intent to sell it, not give it away to friends and neighbors. So if you have a hive of bees and you are producing honey, but the honey is only going to be given out to your friends and neighbors, if you package your food in your home kitchen, that does not apply as a limited food establishment. If you start selling that honey to other people, it may apply that you get licensed and inspected. The key is that there are no potentially hazardous foods. That's what it used to be called. It's now called TCS, time and temperature controlled for safety foods. There are no foods that require that they be kept at mostly in refrigeration in order to be safe. that are allowed to be made in a limited food establishment. And that's why it's called limited more than anything else, because we limit the types of foods that can be made. So only shelf-stable foods can be made in an LFE. And those items can only be sold in the state of Pennsylvania. They can't be sold outside of the state because other states do not recognize limited foods or do not recognize cottage food. Maryland has now cottage food law, but you can only sell in the state of Pennsylvania for those foods. So no internet sales of foods that are made in a limited food establishment. Limited food establishment can be used for storing food on a residential property. You can process and handle food from that home residential kitchen. Or you can process and handle a food in another kitchen that doesn't meet the regulatory standards. Something is set up more like a home kitchen in an alternate location. So if you go to a church or a fire hall, because you're not going to use your own kitchen, or you remodel the garage or a basement or an outbuilding, but it's still set up like a home kitchen, the standard types of appliances, the standard types of water. You don't have the 3-compartment sink that you would have in a commercial facility, then it's still considered a limited food establishment. And the final judgment on whether you're a limited food establishment or you can do something more will rest with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture inspector. General foods, the first one is what gets more people than anything else. No pets or animals in your household at any time. When I was doing food for profit, I had a number of people who were very honest with themselves and they could not give up Fluffy. And so they would leave at the first break, knowing that they were not going to be able to move forward. I would discuss before they left about maybe you could go to your church kitchen, maybe you could go to a fire hall kitchen, maybe you could do this. No, I wanted to do it in my own home and I'm not going to give up my cat or I'm not going to give up my dog. So they stopped, but you're not allowed in a limited food establishment to have those pets. Children are not allowed in the kitchen during processing. They are allowed, obviously, in their own home kitchen at other times, but not while they're processing, unless they are old enough that you can really say that they are helping with that endeavor. Before you ever start working on setting up your food business in your home, you must have the water supply approved. If it's a public water source, you must get a certificate of it being potable water from the provider. And if you have a private source, such as a well, some people might out west have a cistern, but mostly wells in this area, it must be tested for coliform bacteria and nitrate and nitrite. Might be a retest on a monthly basis or annually after you get started, but you have to have a benchmark test that shows that that water is safe, even if it's not a major ingredient in your product. And you must also comply with local zoning and ordinances. So you need to check with your township, you need to check with your borough to make sure you're allowed to operate a food business there. Even if you're not going to have big supply trucks coming in, even if you're going to take the food someplace else to sell it, like at a farmer's market or somewhere else, you still need to comply with the zoning necessary. So zoning and water are a given right from the start. And then you think about the fact that you have or can not have pets. You can have an outdoor pet, but not an indoor pet. And how you're going to be able to handle family matters. That moves you forward. Along with that, all ingredients have to be properly stored. And the ingredients that you're going to use for your kitchen operation, your business operation, have to be stored separately from those that the household uses. So separate things of flour, sugar, if you're making some type of baked good, on a separate shelf or even in a separate cabinet. You can't make dinner while you're making food for sale. You have to separate your home use of the kitchen from the commercial processing. You need to comply with all state and federal laws and regulations, which includes getting that inspection and getting that license. During the pandemic, we have a lot of people who have been flying under radar, and they did start their business. Now they have to come through and have that inspection and get registered, because that's part of what's in the law. There is that registration fee of $35 a year, and the inspection is required by PDA. It might be a yearly inspection or a bi-yearly inspection. And all the foods that are made in that particular system need to be properly labeled before they are sold. The PDA inspector is a great one to ask. They'll be your first and best friend if you have this kind of business, and they're the best ones to ask about how to appropriately label, so you get everything you need to legally be on the label, and you don't make those claims that are going to cause it to be more complicated to sell your product. Or if you do, you work with those complications. These are the types of things we can do in a limited food establishment. I talked about the baked goods, not custard pies, not our pumpkin pies that we have coming up for Thanksgiving. Anything that needs to be refrigerated is a TCS product. And so those baked goods like cookies and cakes without any kind of cream frosting that makes them have to be in the refrigerator. Breads, you could have some type of fruit bread, but not something that has a large moisture content. Dried herbs, seasonings, spices, you can make spice kits for people to buy to make their own dip or various other products. Jarred, in other words, canned, but not in a metal can. Jarred dressings or sauces. Acidified foods like our famous pickles and pickled cauliflower and various other products like that, that bring the pH down to a safe level. These are apple butters and fruit spreads that we're talking about here, not dairy butters, because again, they would have to be refrigerated. Any kind of dehydrated foods might be able to be packaged in a limited food establishment. Most candies, except for our famous opera fudge that is made up by a lot of people up in Lebanon County. Honey, as I talked to before, jams and jellies, the nut mixtures. Beef or meat jerky needs to be cooked to a point where you can break it with a hammer. It has to be hard beef jerky. It cannot be chewy beef jerky, because that has too much water activity in it. But there is a way to make some other meat, like deer meat jerky or beef jerky, that you would be able to use. And finally, the maple syrup and other products that come from the maple industry. Many of those can be made in a residential style kitchen. The downside of an LFE is, as I talked to you about before, you can't sell by the internet, or you can't make out-of-state sales. So it really limits the wholesale potential for your product, or the distance sale potential for your product. It limits how you can diversify, because you may start out with a product that's perfectly good and then ultimately turn out to be another product that you'd like to produce as well that cannot be made in the LFE. And then you have to make the hard decision about whether you're going to move to a commercial kitchen to continue with your operation. You may run out of production space. For that cookie business, there are only so many countertops to cool those cookies. And so being in your home kitchen may limit how much you can do and how far you can grow. And there are ever tightening food safety regulations. I have seen in the last decade changes that have been made to the food code that make it more challenging to do some of the products that the folks in LFEs had started and had grown as their food business. Big one is the ever-present barbecue sauce. Suddenly they found out a couple of years ago that they needed to take, everyone doing a barbecue sauce would need to take a class on how to process, the Better Process School, in order to continue to provide their barbecue sauce, even though they had gone along swimmingly, might not have had any kind of problems up to that point. A lot of more information that we don't have time to discuss this morning can be found in the application packet for a food establishment, for limited food establishments. That is at that URL you see at the bottom, and I'm made aware by Kathy that we will make available hard copies of this presentation, or actually PDFs of this presentation. So you'll be able to see that long URL to be able to get to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture site. I would say if you just keep track of through food safety, so agriculture.pa.gov, consumer_protection, another backslash, and food safety, you're going to be able to get there. But this application package is not just an application package, but you see only the first few pages are actually the application, the part that's in red, the page 3 to 7, and the rest of the 18 pages all have to do with handy hints about specific types of products in an LFE. So I encourage you to take a look at this if you haven't already and you're considering or working with somebody who is considering having a food processing business in their home. I mentioned about the cookie business that is running out of counter space, or someone who wanted to make some type of product that requires refrigeration once the product is made. That's the time to consider path 3. Path 2 being the LFE, path 3 being commercial food establishment. Often you'll hear it referred to by PDA as just food establishment, but it is commercial food establishment, so we make a differentiation from the limited food establishment. It's for businesses that prepare, package, or distribute foods. And the biggest confusion I run into in relation to this is that it isn't just that you find a commercial kitchen or a licensed kitchen. I hear those terms so often on the part of entrepreneurs. I found a licensed kitchen, and they feel they can go in because the kitchen's licensed and they can make whatever they want. No, the kitchen is just simply a vehicle to get on the path to where you want to go. Your business actually has to be inspected and registered with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture in order to make and sell these foods safely and legally. It really needs to be a non-residential kitchen. It needs to be set up according to the standards for more of a commercial kitchen. So you think restaurant kitchen, think mini factory, if you will. It needs to be one that is set up for food handling and commercial food handling. You see all the TCS foods that are allowed. I pulled this directly out of the application. So not only can you do some of those acidified foods that we talked about earlier, but we can also start talking about other products that would require some kind of refrigeration after they are worked on. So a long range of foods in comparison to what we saw, and some duplication, because you'll see the jams and jellies I talked about previously. Talk about baked goods and various other things that still can be made in this kitchen. It's just a heightened level of awareness in relation to safety. And most of those kitchens are going to require some type of food safety system, a food safety plan, which is governed by the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA. And many of you will have already heard the term FSMA, but FSMA basically came into being in 2011 as part of FDA's first step toward safer food across our country, even though the United States has had one of the safest food systems in the world to this day. Almost every, in fact, every food business does have to work within following what are called the good manufacturing practices. These good manufacturing practices are things that you need to take into consideration and have in place in your food business. What I have on the screen here is a checklist. It's actually the first page of a 5-page checklist that is put together by PDA. Let me check the chat just for a second to see. Oh, okay. I see that Jim asked about CBD added to food products. Jim, I'm afraid CBD cannot be added to food products because CBD is one of those things. Any food product that we make here in the state of Pennsylvania, whether you're in a limited food establishment or in a commercial food establishment, or even some type of retail food establishment, and we'll talk about in a few minutes, has to have foods that are generally regarded as safe, GRAS, G-R-A-S. And there was consideration that was made by PDA in relation to products that contain CBD. And their judgment to this point is, and especially because those things such as marijuana that will have CBD in it, and it's derived from it, are not legal across the whole United States. They're legal someplace, but not other places. And so they have judged that CBD cannot be added to food because it's not generally considered safe. Even though we see products that are made and in other states that come into the United States, we might see them when we go to Sheetz or someplace like that, a product that has CBD added to a food product. Those are made in states where the states have decided that they will take on the responsibility, even though it's not generally regarded as safe in relation to a national stance. And they will take responsibility for allowing businesses in their states to make those foods. Pennsylvania considered this and decided that they were going to side with the judgment of FDA, and until FDA changes their stance in relation to the safety of CBD in Pennsylvania, our businesses aren't allowed to add CBD. Jessica also asked about, she says, okay, and Kathy has answered her a little bit, but we just talked about animals not being allowed in the home. I will elaborate really quickly and then we'll move on. That if you have an animal in the home and you want to have a food business in the home, you can't make it in the food in your actual family kitchen in most cases, because you do not have a double set of doors. They require, say you want to do it in your basement instead of the kitchen, they require 2 doors. One door from your house into a waiting space, another door that will allow you to go down the stairs into the basement, or that you always take everything through an exterior door that goes into the basement, so that there is no way that the pets can get into that space. So that space is kept free of all pet dander, all presence of pets. It is a complicated thing to do anything other than just say that we can't have pets in the home. But that is the one thing that I've seen that some inspectors have allowed you to do. Now back to the good manufacturing practices. As I said, this is a 5-page checklist. It is found again on the site that I talked about earlier. And the URL is at the bottom of this screen. It allows people who are setting up their commercial food establishment, as well as the PDA inspectors who come out and look at the food establishment, to make sure that they are following all the good manufacturing practices that are in the current list. Those manufacturing practices cover building and facilities, personnel health and practices, sanitation controls, equipment maintenance, production and process controls, and storage and distribution. So a lot of information in those pages that you have to consider, and how you are handling each one of those steps in order to make things work. Some people consider someplace else in order to, or where they might make their TCS foods or set up for internet sales. First of all, you can set up your own commercial facility, your own commercial kitchen that follows the guidelines that are established, that follows all of those good manufacturing practices I just talked about. But for an untried product that hasn't been marketed in the general population, that may be an undue expense right off the top. You may be getting a little ambitious. So maybe starting out in a restaurant after hours. If you have a baking operation, you have fluffy, you're not going to make it in your home, you're going to need a commercial kitchen, then maybe talking to somebody who only serves dinners or serves lunches and dinners so that you can get in at 4 in the morning will be a good option to be able to use a commercial kitchen and move ahead. You can use a ghost or cloud kitchen, and I was asked about that earlier. Ghost kitchens, cloud kitchens are started before pandemic actually, and we're gaining real traction because a lot of restaurants were busy considering turning tables out in front. And so they wanted to also take advantage of the number of people who wanted to pick up or have delivery service. And so cloud kitchens were born, ghost kitchens were born. They were commercial kitchens that could be used sometimes by several different parties. So they're shared kitchens in a way. And there's just no front of the house on them. So there is no place that people will necessarily come or that they recognize. I've always also heard the term dark stores, where we have the place where things are processed and our things are warehoused, but people never come there. There's never a showroom for people to be able to get those products. And so that might be an option for you. Although, as I alluded to earlier, FDA is looking very seriously at anything that has to do with e-commerce and food. And so I would expect that there's going to be more regulation of those ghost or cloud kitchens in the future. They still are a great option for people who are getting started. Might be a shared kitchen incubator. There are a few of them in the state of Pennsylvania. They do go in and out of business, but I suggest that you go to www.thekitchendoor.com and you put in your zip code, and they will show you within a radius where there might be a shared kitchen for you so that you could go in and use that commercial kitchen. Finally, co-packers. If you really aren't wedded to the whole idea of making the product, you just like to sell it, you like to see people's delight on their faces when they get a great product that you have helped create, then a co-packer may be good. However, co-packers are sometimes hard to find. And secondarily, co-packers may require a minimum amount, which is larger than the first run that you want to make in order to be able to get your product out into the marketplace. So there are good things and bad things, but there are lots of options, I guess is what I'm saying. So you don't have to say, I have to build my own commercial facility right off the bat. That may be a goal in your business plan. Between that LFE and the food establishment is that the food establishment has to follow the FDA requirements following Title 21 of the Federal Code, with only the exemption of if you have a PDA milk or milk product permit, and you have a milk inspector who comes out onto your farm to inspect that jug milk you're producing. Except for that, you need that food establishment registration. Or if you have some type of product that is under sole jurisdiction of USDA Food Safety Inspection Service. And that Food Safety Inspection Service has jurisdiction under about certain dairy products, certain meat products, interestingly enough, catfish, but not necessarily other types of fish. And so there are only a limited number of things that are under FSIS, but again, the PDA inspector, when you're talking to them about your food establishment, will tell you whether you're going to have to be under jurisdiction of USDA FSIS. Otherwise, all Pennsylvania registered food establishments are going to comply with, first of all, the GMPs I talked about and applicable portions of the Food Safety Modernization Act rules, unless they're exempted from certain rules for specific reasons. And so that means that you need to have a preliminary product test. You may have to continue to check pH on every batch or every few batches. You may have to continue to check that it meets the standards that your original batch meant, but it has to go to a commercial lab in order for your product to be approved to be made in your food establishment. You may need that additional process training, like the good processing school that I talked about. And you likely will need a written food safety plan that you've adopted and that you have evidence that you are following in order to make sure that you are recognizing the hazards that are associated with the food that you're making and that the product is safe. So you can hear it's a lot more complicated, but that complication is very important because this food is entering potentially the national or international food stream. Lots of good information in relation to food establishments, if that's what you or a person you're mentoring is thinking about. First of all, the PDA commercial food establishment application that we see here on the screen. Again, in red, we see the few number of pages that are actually part of applying for registration and the number of pages that we talk about the guidelines for food establishments and the current GMPs and all of that good information. Another great source is at the FDA website. We see the URL, the short URL there, and it's a surprisingly cordial or comfortable way that FDA has expressed how to start a food business. It's very approachable to use that particular guide. And so I recommend both those to you as you move forward in relation to establishing a food establishment. Finally, we get to the retail food establishments, and I can hear a big sigh, a big cyber sigh on the part of those people who joined us in relation to various types of restaurants and various other places that you want to start, because I'm getting to that now. Retail food facilities are one of those subpaths under these retail food enterprises, and they include what you see there: the restaurants, the beer distributors, the grocery stores and convenience stores, the delis, the butcher shops, the bakery schools, and food auctions. All of those are clustered together under retail food facilities and are handled under one particular set of licensure. Farmers markets are under this because they are a way that retail food is gotten out to the customer. Mobile food facilities fall under that, and they even have an area that touches on fairs and temporary events that I'm not going to talk a lot about today, but certainly we could talk about in the future if you give me a call or send me an email. The biggest problem with retail food is, who are they regulated by? That's one of those it depends things. Some retail food facilities in Pennsylvania are not under PA jurisdiction, and so are not inspected, are not licensed, because we are really in love with local government in Pennsylvania, and so we set it up that way. So some of those groups have county health departments, and that is Allegheny, Bucks, Chester, Erie, Montgomery, and Philadelphia counties that handle all food businesses within their purview themselves, all those retail food businesses. If it's a wholesale food business, if it is a manufacturing or processing food business, PDA is still going to be involved at some point. But the retail food facilities are under the jurisdiction of those particular entities. And we have a number of municipalities, boroughs, townships, and cities that inspect and license themselves. I show you the first page over here on the left of the retail food jurisdiction by county. If you go into that website, again, in the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture site, Consumer Protection, Food Safety, you'll see this multi-page Excel that talks, or spreadsheet that talks about by county, any place that is under some type of other inspection. Reading the very small print, you see that Adams County is entirely under PDA, for instance, but there are other counties like Carbon County where there are a number of different boroughs that all have their own food inspectors. So you have to check to see. Check the local health department's list, as I said, to see. There's no reciprocity between local food health departments and PDA. So if you sign on with PDA, and then you're selling someplace where there is a local jurisdiction, you're going to have to work with them to fine tune what you have set up to do. Mobile businesses like food trucks, or people who journey from one farmer's market to another farmer's market to another farmer's market, may have more than one jurisdiction that they deal with in order to make sure they're meeting all of the standards and they're working with all the people who regulate them. There's a lot of good information on this retail site talking about how to apply and what you do if you're approved or if you're not approved. But also I'm pointing to the right-hand side where they talk about a food thermometer fact sheet and sanitation and food safety in the deli. So there's a lot of food business specific information, the information about labeling of unpackaged foods and how you're going to be able to flow that packaged food through to the consumer. That's all part of what's on this resource. So again, you've heard me say before, and you'll hear me say again, that Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture site is really a great one in order to give you a lot more detailed information than we can talk about today. That application, once again, like all the other applications I've shown you quickly, has just a few pages for the actual application, and then a lot of guidelines on how to prepare your floor plans and to determine equipment that you're going to need, and charts and schedules that you'd use within your retail food business. So even if you are one of those people who is worked with by and regulated by a local food Department of Health or a county Department of Health, you can get a lot of good information by picking up on this pamphlet that you'll never really use in relation to applying for your license, but certainly to get you more information about the practicalities, how it can be done, because PDA has their feet on the ground and really can help you find ways to work on it. Moving on to the farmers market stands. Individuals who sell their products through farmers markets, and this doesn't just have to be farmers who are adding value to something and creating their jams and jellies or selling their fresh produce at a stand in Central Market in Lancaster, for instance, but anyone else who wants to make and sell some type of packaged food product or wants to have some kind of food service in a farmers market, especially a farmers market that is not under one of those county or municipal jurisdictions, needs to have a license to operate. Each of the individual stands needs to have a license to operate. That was a change that occurred in 2011. Before that, it was just the farmers market manager that had the license. But if one person was found in having a problem, then the whole market could be closed down. Because you have your individual license as someone selling at that market, if you keep to your good sanitary practices and your good management practices, you can remain open while your problematic neighbor gets shut for a while until they can fix those challenges. If you go to multiple farmers markets, you're going to need multiple license. It isn't once and done for all farmers markets. So each farmers market, you're going to need a separate license. All foods and beverages that are sold need to be an approved source. You cannot make something in your non-registered kitchen and carry it in to hand out, even as a sample, in a farmers market stand. Whether you have to pay the fee or whether you're exempt from the fee depends on what's sold at the stand. If you have prepackaged non-TCS foods only, for instance, I worked not too long ago with somebody who was going to package herbs to sell and mixtures of herbs to sell. She was registered to be able to, as a limited food establishment, to put together the packages of the herbs in her kitchen at home. And then she took it to the stand at the farmer's market, and she was not charged the fee at her stand simply because she had prepackaged non-TCS foods. or if you're doing raw agricultural commodities. So if you're the farmer and you're selling your turnips and your peppers and your tomatoes and everything else, then you're not going to pay the fee. But I didn't say you were exempt from inspection. You'll still be inspected, you'll still be licensed, you just don't have to pay the fee. Mobile food facilities are also under the retail banner. I'm going to check the chat very quickly and then we'll move on to our mobile food. I'm asked by Stephen, do reputable food market stand owners require each vendor to provide them with a permit before they lease the space? I haven't really heard that a market stand owner, oh, you're talking about a vendor. Okay, you are talking about the market stand, the market manager, I think, rather than market stand owner. The market manager, I haven't heard of them asking about getting a permit. Thanks for the clarification. It is the manager. So I haven't heard of managers necessarily asking for the permit and being able to see the license for operation before they lease in the space. But what I have heard in relation to market managers is that market managers have required that you show proof of having a certain amount of product liability insurance. And the last gold standard I heard was $2 million worth of insurance in relation to an average farmer's market stand. Now, that doesn't mean you're paying $2 million. That means you're insuring for $2 million. But they do require that the liability remain with the stand owner rather than with the market itself. And so they are making sure that the market is listed as a secondary insured on any policy that the vendor has picked up, as the individual stand vendor has picked up. Certainly, there are probably cases where they make sure that the market manager might ask the stand leaser or lessor for a copy of their license, but they're probably going to know that that license exists because they're going to have contact with the PDA inspector. And so someone will have come in and looked and inspected before the license is given, and a good market manager will have been around and know that that has occurred. So they're going to be able to catch up, but certainly they could ask. And so you need to have your license in place before you start operating. The lady I talked about who was doing her herbs had her inspection. She had her registration in place a week before she was able to open her stand at the market and move forward, even though, as I said, she didn't have to pay her fee for retail simply because she was only doing those packaged foods. Back to mobile food facilities. We're talking about food trucks, we're talking about stick stands and carts and other structures that can be moved around from place to place. And it can be where food's stored, it can be where it's prepared, processed, distributed, or sold, any one of those. Can't have a mobile food facility that doesn't move. So it has to be located at one site no more than 14 consecutive days at any one time. And you don't have to be open all 14 days, but if you don't move that food truck, then the clock is ticking. Now that is the maximum that you can have at one site, especially with food trucks getting so popular during COVID. There are some municipalities, such as Hazleton, for example, where you can only have your food truck open and selling at a particular point for 2 hours at a time. Then you need to move that food truck. I thought that was a little complicated, but the food law says no more than 14 days. If you're physically located at any one site for more than 14 consecutive days, it's not considered a mobile food facility, and you're going to have to meet the regulations for more of a restaurant, a takeout restaurant, which would not have seating, but would still require all of the steps taken to register you as a in-place restaurant. There's a great resource beyond the application for this particular one, the Mobile Foods Facilities Operation Guide that's out at the PDA website. It's a multiple page, and it is quite frankly a go-to document for me. So any folks who are SCORE mentors, you might want to pick up a copy of this just to hang on to in your file in case you start working with someone, because it tells you exactly the kind of foods, from things that are prepackaged like packs of cheese crackers and bottles of water, all the way up to the person who is going to be making barbecue, or going to be selling hot dogs, or going to be selling other products that are warmed, of exactly what type of sanitary procedures you have to have and how the business is going to be set up, and the kind of regulations, because it varies depending on what you're making. That's another, it depends. So I've glossed over really quickly all of those, and I see my time's just about up. I had hoped to cover this much more quickly, but I'm glad for all the questions that we had. I really want to say there's no such thing as a simple food business. Every business is unique. And that's what makes it so much fun to work with people, to discover what they're going to be able to do in their business. And it all comes back again to that, it depends. But I think I hope I've, over the past hour or better part of the hour, been able to shed some light on the fact that there are some great resources and guides. First of all, with your SCORE mentor. Second of all, with the PDA website, that will allow you to find the right path, not try to put your bus through that covered bridge, and get your business from concept to reality, to success, to sustainability. And that's what we're all hoping for everybody who has a food business here in the state of Pennsylvania. So glad to open to any more questions.
Well, first, I'm going to jump right in because this was incredibly helpful for me, even though you and I have worked together a number of times. I think you made it clear in how you split out the categories. And I think the thing on city codes or understanding local municipalities is the one that can catch people if they haven't done that checking to find out if their establishment is regulated locally as well. So that was excellent advice.
That insight is very important, because every food business across the state of Pennsylvania is going to have to comply with whatever PDA would put in place, because they are the gold standard. However, if you have a local municipality that has a Department of Health that you are under jurisdiction for, that means that they may put additional requirements that PDA does not require. So starting with PDA's requirements and then being ready to be surprised about what some other jurisdiction may have in their back pocket that they want you to comply with too. I've seen a lot of people who have been really concerned and said, this is not fair. My friend who is over there can do this, but I have to do that. That's the way it is in the state of Pennsylvania under those local jurisdictions. And that's probably one of the biggest surprises people get, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was really helpful. Other questions that people on the line have?
I've got a question, Winifred. Could you talk a little bit about when nutritional labeling is required?
Okay, now, first of all, you have to have something that has a label on. So we'd probably step back from most of the retail food establishments, and we would head back to those food establishments and the limited food establishments. Either one of them might have the requirement for nutritional labeling. If the business makes any kind of health-related claim or nutritional claim on their package, they are required to have the nutrition facts panel that we're all now familiar with, that on their packaging. However, if you have not made any health-related or nutritional claim on the package, and you are a small business, There is a small business exemption from having to put the nutrition facts panel on your product, on your label. And it depends on how much food you're selling. There is a certain amount, and up to, I think it's $10,000 revenues a year, you automatically get the exemption. And you don't have to do anything other than just go on your way, knowing that you are complying with not having any of those claims, and you're a small business. If you're above that very small threshold, then you have to send a boilerplate letter, which is out at the FDA website. You have to send it to them each year saying, we are still complying with the, and requesting the small business exemption. And that means that you still will be allowed to not have the nutrition facts. However, there would be another reason that a business might want to have nutrition facts on their panel, and that is people read those things. And so if all of your competitors have a nutrition facts panel and you do not on your product, and those readers see that and it's important to them, you may lose sales. So you may voluntarily, even though you could be able to have an exemption because you're a very small business, you might still put that nutrition facts panel on your label, simply because it's for the readers, and it's a marketing tool rather than a regulatory tool for it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Isn't there a sales level that's something above $10,000 where it's absolutely required to have nutritional labeling?
There is. You fall out of the category of a very small business. And I'm going to do this off the top of my memory, because even though I have done financial training with people, numbers go in and out of my mind, but my mind is saying it is $100,000. I think it's the next bump up that you, okay, if you're above $100,000, you are going to absolutely have to have that nutrition facts. But I would caution people, more people fall into the problem of making those claims without actually realizing it. I once had somebody in my class who was making beef jerky, and he already had that long tube, that long plastic tube. It might not have been plastic, some other material that he was going to put these pieces of beef jerky in, and he had them all printed up, and he had said, a great source of protein on the front of it, with no nutrition facts on the back to back it up. And he had to throw away the whole roll, and or find a place on that already cluttered tube to stick one on in order to be able to move ahead. But there is the requirement for 4 things on every label, which is for everybody, whether they have that exemption or not, which is the name of the product. And if it's a fancy name, you have to put the common name underneath it in small print. Look at Rice Krispies sometime. There is a small thing that says it's a toasted rice cereal underneath in small print. But you don't have to be a big business to do that. You need to put the net weight or contents. So it can be the number if you're making cookies, a dozen or a baker's dozen. You need to have the name of your business and your city and state. You don't need to have the mailing address or the street address. And you need to have the ingredients from the one that weighed the most to the one that weighed the least. Some of them can be clustered. You have to talk to the PDA inspector about what ones can be clustered, so you don't make a mistake there, but they can be clustered. And if you have sub ingredients, you buy something like you're dipping pretzels in chocolate, and you buy somebody else's pretzels, you have to put the name of the pretzels that you're using and then their list of ingredients. So this list can get very, very long. Yeah. So your point is well taken, Ed, that maybe you don't want to have, if there's not a marketing reason and you are a small business, you don't want to have that nutrition facts yet cluttering up your label. You want to spend time having people enjoy the product.
Okay, how about one last question? I think we're running into time for everybody.
I see I see things in the chat too.
Yep,
If you
yep.
want to take that. Stephen has asked about who might you hire to help with nutritional labeling. I have a great short list, and I'm going to give you my email address in a moment. So send me an email and I could send you, just tell me we're in this class, in this session, and I can send you a short list of online sites that you can go out to that are very reasonable, that are going to be able, you plug in your list of ingredients or the type of product, and they can come up with something that is close enough for the nutrition facts panel for you to be able to use a legal one. So I would start there with one of those sources for information, rather than necessarily going out and hiring a food lab, although you certainly could use a food lab for your nutrition labeling. And many of those services also will help you print your label, do a master of what your label would look like for the nutritional labeling. So they're great. Tim said, can you please provide a link to the boilerplate exception letter? Sure. I can certainly do that. And again, that's one of those things that's a long URL, not off the top of my head, but I'm going to be
Can
giving
we
you
include it in the
resources, Kathy.
follow-up? Winfred, we can include that in the follow-up,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Plus
let's
a
do
couple
that.
of these other things. Okay.
Let's
Thank
do that. Maybe I can send you the list too of the
Yeah.
companies that would do that, that type of information.
Okay.
Okay,
right.
those are the questions I saw in the chat.
All righty.